Ryan Caldwell sat in a rocker on the porch of his old, run-down two-story home in rural West Texas, sipping a cold glass of sweet tea. The day was hot and dusty, but it seemed like all days were like that in this part of the country. However, he enjoyed the privacy and silence that this place gave him. He took another sip of tea and lit his second cigarette of the morning. He looked around and noted what things needed to be done. Then he said, "To hell with this," and decided that everything would remain for tomorrow, as it was yesterday and the day before, and many more days before that. So he pulled his beat-up Stetson over his eyes and continued enjoying his cigarette. In the end, no one visited him. Plus, he didn't buy this house to impress anyone, quite the contrary. He didn't want guests. He just wanted to be left alone. That's why he bought the place 3 years ago, along with the 20 acres of land and bush on which it sat. Of course, he could afford better, much better. But the house had a good foundation and strong walls. The plumbing and electrical were in surprisingly good condition, and there was even cable TV, telephone, and internet. The roof was also in good condition, and he saw no signs of rot, and that was enough for him. So he bought the house, paying the asking price. Cash. The realtor was happy, the seller was happy to get rid of it, and he was happy that he now had a place he could call home, even though it was essentially a wreck in desperate need of a paint job. His attention was suddenly drawn to a noise to his left. He turned his head and focused his one good eye on the cloud of dust at the end of his long dirt road. Who the hell came here, he thought. Concerned, he grabbed a loaded 12-gauge pump-action shotgun that was sitting against the wall next to him and placed it on his lap. He watched as a black sedan pulled up in front of his house. He noticed a sticker on the front bumper and realized it was a rental car. A cloud of dust enveloped the car, and Ryan waved his hand in front of his face to protect his one eye from the flying dirt. The driver's door opened, and a young man in a white polo shirt stepped out of the car. Ryan stood up with the gun in his hands and loaded a round into the chamber. The young man shuddered when he saw the tall, thin man. A large bandage covered his left eye and partially hid the scar that ran down the left side of his face. A thick, dark beard covered the lower part of his face. However, the man knew it was Ryan Caldwell, even though the photo he had was taken over 10 years ago. "Are you Ryan Caldwell?" he asked nervously. Apparently, it wasn't a cop, Ryan thought. "Depends," Ryan said. "Are you some kind of salesman? If so, then I'm not going to buy anything." "I'm not going to sell anything, sir," the man said. "Then you must be fed, in which case there is no Ryan Caldwell here," Ryan said. "I work for the government, but I'm not here on official business," the man said. "It's a family matter." "I don't have a family," Ryan said. "We are talking about your daughter Sarah, sir," said the young man. "I told you I don't have a family," Ryan said. "My daughter died more than 10 years ago." That wasn't entirely true, and Ryan knew it. He did have a daughter, but she had been dead to him for about 12 years, since she was 16. "It's a matter of life and death, sir," said the young man. "You're right, kid," Ryan said. In these parts, calling someone a boyfriend was considered an insult and often led to a fight. "You can either get back in this jalopy and get out of here, or I'll put you down where you are." "Sir, please," the man begged, raising his hand. "Can you give me 5 minutes of your time?" 5 minutes, Ryan said. He was interested in what this young man wanted, and he certainly wasn't acting like a lawman or a fed. Not a second more. The young man nodded and took the briefcase from his car. "Can I go up there?" he asked Ryan. "It's terribly hot here." "Welcome to West Texas," Ryan said. "Come on, show me what you have." The young man hurried onto the porch, and Ryan pointed to a wooden chair. "Do you have an ID?" Ryan asked. The man pulled out his wallet and showed Ryan his ID. Ryan read the name out loud. "Robert Green, Ryan Reed. Is it really you?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir, it's me," he said. "Everyone calls me Bob." "So, Bob," Ryan said, "who do you work for? FBI? CIA? "I work for the Department of Commerce, sir," Bob said. "I do statistical analysis." "Ministry of Commerce. Statistical analysis. Sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry. And what does this have to do with me? None, sir, said Bob. As I said, we are talking about your daughter. Sarah. She's my wife. He pulled out another photo and showed it to Ryan. Ryan looked at the photo and recognized his daughter in her wedding dress. Bob stood next to her, smiling. He returned the photo back. Congratulations, Ryan said. But as I said, I don't have a family anymore. So you don't care if your daughter dies? Bob asked, visibly upset and unable to understand how a man could turn his back on his only child. Ryan looked at him before answering. She's been dead to me for over 10 years now, he said. Bob nodded, wiped away a tear, and began to stand up. Okay, he said, his voice filled with sadness. I'll tell her and our son. Sorry to waste your time, sir. Wait, Ryan said. Bob sat down again and looked at the old man. What's wrong with her? Ryan asked. She's in the hospital, Bob said. She was diagnosed with a very rare blood disease. The doctor said that if she did not receive a bone marrow transplant soon, she would die within 6 months. Ryan thought for a moment. His father died of a rare blood disorder many years ago. Although he was angry with his daughter, he did not like the idea of making her son, his grandson, an orphan. He knew what it was like to lose a parent. And you say that you have a son? Ryan asked. Bob nodded and pulled out another photo, handing it to Ryan. Yes, said Bob. He is 3 years old. Sarah named him Ryan after you. Ryan raised his head sharply in surprise. This made her mother very angry, but Sarah didn't care. Ryan chuckled. He could well imagine his ex-wife's reaction to this. What about Sarah's mother? Ryan asked. Could she become a bone marrow donor? The doctor tested her, but she wasn't compatible enough, Bob said. At best, it could give Sarah a few months, but nothing more. I see, Ryan said. So how did you find me? He asked. It wasn't easy, Bob said. It took me several months, even with the resources of the federal government at my disposal. You have proven difficult to find. That was the point, Ryan said. Did you tell anyone you found me? Not yet, Bob said. I wanted to make sure I really found you before I said anything. Ryan nodded. It was a smart move, he said. Did Sarah tell you what happened between her mother and me? She told me something, Bob said. She said that her mother left you for another man. She said she took her mother's side against you, and you didn't take it well. She also said she has regretted it ever since. She tried to contact you. I wrote several letters, but they all came back unopened. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of letters, handing them to Ryan. Ryan looked at the letters tied with red ribbon. They all had a stamp on them. The addressee has dropped out. Return to sender. Is her mother still married to Jake Knight? Ryan asked. Yes, said Bob. But everything is bad for them. He beats her, and we think he's cheating on her. Ryan chuckled at the irony. The cheater gets cheated on. What a delicious, sarcastic pleasure, he thought. Why does she stay with him then? Ryan asked. Mostly because of the money, Bob said. Of course, Ryan thought. It was because of this that she went to him in the first place. You're probably dying to know what happened between Sarah's mother and me, aren't you? Ryan asked. I'm really curious, Bob said. Her mother seems to think you're dead, and she refuses to talk about it at all. Ryan handed the photo back and looked at Bob for a few moments. Do you want to hear about it? He asked the young man. Yes, sir, I do, said Bob. Ryan nodded. This may take a while, Ryan said. Would you like some iced tea? I would very much like to, sir, said Bob. Ryan went inside and returned with a clean glass. He poured some tea from a jug on the table and handed it to him. Thank you, sir, Bob said. First things first, Ryan said. Call me Ryan, not sir. I'm not your boss. For now, he added with a smile. Do you mind if I smoke? He asked, taking a cigarette from the pack in his pocket. Not at all, said Bob. Do you mind if I join? He asked, taking out a pack from his briefcase. Sarah doesn't like it when I smoke in the car. Ryan smiles. Maybe this young man was really worth keeping around. He shook his head. Not at all, Ryan said, lighting a cigarette. He offered Bob the fire and watched as the young man took a deep drag. Let me tell you what happened. Ryan's story. Lisa and I were high school sweethearts. I played on the high school football team, and she was a cheerleader. God, how she looked in that little skirt. We were inseparable then. We made love for the first time since our prom. I had only two dreams at that time: owning my own garage and marrying Lisa. When we graduated from high school, she went to college to get a business degree, and I joined the Army. We planned to get married after my first 4 years of service. I ended up in combat, spending a year in Iraq and another in Afghanistan. That's when I learned that I had another gift. I returned, and we got married as planned. Lisa got a job at Night Petroleum, and I got a job repairing cars. I've been doing it since I was young, and I was damn good at it. Lisa started from the bottom at Night Petroleum. We weren't rich, but we were doing well. Sarah was born 11 months after our wedding. I fell in love with this girl at first sight. Lisa took 3 months of maternity leave and returned to work, taking little Sarah with her. The company had its own child care facility, which saved us a lot of money. We moved forward with our work and finally saved enough money to put a down payment on a house. It wasn't easy, but we managed it. I still dreamed of having my own garage, so I took night classes to learn more about running a business and received my ASS certification. I eventually became a master technician. Lisa also worked her way up at Night Petroleum, eventually becoming the personal assistant to Jake Knight, the company's wealthy CEO. That's when the business trips began. Some of them were overseas, and I spent many weekends playing mommy for Sarah. It didn't bother me. I loved this girl. Despite all this, I thought we had a good marriage and a good life, but I began to notice changes in Lisa's behavior. Suddenly, it seemed like I no longer lived up to her expectations. By then, Sarah was in high school. We were still close, but she was going through that rebellious phase that probably all teenagers go through. And then Lisa unexpectedly dropped the news on me. I returned from work and noticed that she had not returned home yet. This in itself was not unusual. I started cooking dinner, as I've been doing it more and more lately. Finally, Lisa returned home. She told Sarah to go to her room for a while she grabbed a glass of wine. "Is everything okay at work?" I asked her. "Is Jake giving you trouble?" She shook her head and sat down at the kitchen table. "We need to talk," she said. "What's happened?" I asked, sitting down. She pulled something out of her briefcase and handed it to me. "What is this?" I asked. "Divorce papers," she said. At that moment, I could have been knocked down by a feather. "What?" I asked. "Divorce? Why? I don't want to be married to a mechanic," she said, especially emphasizing the word mechanic. "What?" I asked. "Are you saying that after all these years I no longer live up to your expectations?" Then it dawned on me. "Oh God," I said, "you fell in love with someone else, didn't you? You cheated on me. Who is he?" "Jacob Knight," she said calmly. "And yes, we fell in love. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. And yes, we were together." "You mean you had sex with him behind my back?" I said. "You shouldn't be rude," she said. "But yes, we had sex. Many times. It's nothing personal. He just can give me something you never can." "Nothing personal? What do you mean?" I asked. "He's filthy rich," she said. "He's a billionaire. He is not only rich, but also influential. With the snap of a finger, entire governments fall to their knees. And you're just a greaser." "What about our future?" I asked, stunned. "What about Sarah?" "We no longer have a future together," Lisa said coldly. "And Sarah will be fine. Jake has already enrolled her in a private boarding school in the Northeast. She will go there when we return from southern France in a few weeks." "Does Sarah know about this?" I asked in shock. "Of course," said Lisa. "She's very excited about it." "I'd like to hear it from her," I said. "Whatever," Lisa said before calling Sarah back. "This is true?" I asked Sarah. "Did you know what your mother was planning?" Sarah looked down before answering. "Yes," she said quietly. Dad Jake has already prepared everything. He said you'd love it and promised to buy me a new car. Daddy Jake? I asked. Sarah nodded. Yes, she said. Mom told me to call him that. I looked at Lisa, my blood boiled. Don't worry, said Lisa. If you look, you will see that I give you unlimited rights to see Sarah, but I doubt you will see her much, given her schedule. I looked at Sarah again. And are you satisfied with all this? I asked her. Mom said it would be better this way, Dad, she said. Did you know about your mother's relationship with Jake before all this happened? I asked her. She nodded again. Yes, she said. Mom told me to promise that I won't tell anyone. I looked at Lisa again. How long have you been planning this behind my back? I asked. About 6 months, she said. Listen, Ryan, I'm not asking for anything from you, no alimony, no maintenance. All I want is our things and some personal items, and then we'll leave. Sign the papers and everything will be over. What if I decide to fight for it? I asked. That would be unwise, she said. As I said, Jake is very influential. You can't even imagine how much. He can destroy you in an instant. I looked at Sarah and Lisa. None of them could look me in the eye. Okay, I said. I picked up a pen and looked through the divorce papers. She didn't want anything, not even her half of the house. I signed the papers and handed them to her. Thank you, Ryan, Lisa said, taking off the rings and throwing them on the table. I'm sorry it ended like this. Just leave, I said. Now, Sarah came up to me and tried to hug me, but I rejected her attempt. Just leave, I said. You are both dead to me. I never want to see either of you again. Sarah stepped back, tears appearing in her eyes. Lisa looked at me, shocked. Ryan, she began. Just get the hell out. Now, I shouted. Tell Jake, if he tries to interfere in my life, I swear to God, I will kill him on the spot. They both left the house, and I never saw or heard from them again. After they left, I went upstairs and found that all their things were gone. Apparently, Lisa took them out while I was at work. I took a few days off and removed all traces of them from the house. Photos, clothes, everything they left behind was collected in a barrel and burned. I didn't want anything that would remind me of them. Without Lisa's income, it became difficult to pay the bills, so I sold the house and much of the furniture. I rented a one-room apartment and lived there for several months. I remember seeing an article about Jake and Lisa getting married after I received a final divorce decree. The photo in the newspaper was of Lisa and Jake, with Sarah smiling next to them. According to the article, Jake planned to adopt her. That night, I was sitting at the bar, drowning in beer, when Bill Johnson, an old Army friend whom I had not seen for many years, approached me. Hey, Ryan, he said. How are you, man? He asked. I shook my head. It doesn't matter, I said quietly. I saw your ex get married, he said. This is bad. Isn't that your daughter with them? I don't have a daughter anymore, I told him. He offered me his condolences, and we chatted a bit while drinking. And then he voiced his idea. Listen, Ryan, he said. There's nothing keeping you here anymore. Why don't you join me? I'm recruiting a team for one thing, and I really need your help. What to do? I asked him. Mostly private security, he said. Like what we did in Afghanistan, but with much better compensation. I'm probably too old for this shit, I told him. He laughed and shook his head. Come on, you're the same age as me, he said. You're still in good shape. A couple of weeks with me, and I'll get you in shape, no problem. I thought about this for a while. I had dreams, but that was when I had Lisa and Sarah. Now that they were gone, I had nothing left, not even a dog. To hell with it, I said. Okay, consider me in business. Thus began my 9-year career as a private security consultant, or more simply put, as a mercenary. I turned in my resignation 2 weeks in advance, put all my stuff in storage since I'd be gone most of the time, and started my new life as a mercenary. All in all, it wasn't such a bad life. I traveled a lot, made good money, doing what I knew best, besides fixing cars. Most of the time, we actually consulted or trained the people who would do the bulk of the work, but sometimes we had to step in. Otherwise, they would have simply killed us. My last job was providing security for a Middle Eastern sheikh who needed help fighting outside interests that were trying to take over his oil fields and ruin him. It was a business that his family owned and operated for many years. I didn't care who these outside interests were, and I honestly didn't want to know. I was doing my job as always, but one day the fields began to be heavily attacked by groups of black-clad people in pickup trucks. We fought them off, but not before a nearby tank exploded after being hit by a grenade fired from someone in the back of a pickup truck. I woke up some time later, apparently in a hospital room, with half my head covered in bandages. I saw the Roman 4 in one arm and felt the tube in my mouth. After a while, a nurse came in and checked my vital signs. The doctor came in, examined me, and ordered me to remove the tube from my mouth. That's when I learned that I had lost my left eye. I was hit by shrapnel, apparently from an exploding tank. Apart from a ragged scar that ran down the left side of my face and a glass eye in my left socket, there were no other signs of serious damage. A couple of days after I woke up, the sheikh came to me. He told me that I had been in the hospital for several weeks undergoing reconstructive surgery. During this time, I was kept in a medically induced coma to aid the recovery process. He also gave me a very large bonus. It appeared that outside interests no longer thought it worthwhile to attack him or his oil fields directly. After this attack, the sheikh managed to negotiate terms that allowed him to remain in business and become even more profitable than before. As it turned out, the external interests were Knight Petroleum. "So Jake Knight knew I was working for you?" I asked. "It seems so," said the sheikh. "Your brave defense taught him to behave like a civilized man and not like a street thug. And for this, I am eternally grateful to you. I take it you know about him and my wife?" I asked. He smiled before answering. "Yes, I know about him and your wife," he said, handing me a folder with a dossier. "I'm used to knowing who I'm dealing with. As far as he knows, you didn't survive that attack. I decided not to tell him about it and never will. After all, I owe you the life and business of my family. Perhaps now you can live in peace." "I'll try," I said. He smiled and we shook hands. After a few weeks, it was determined that I was safe to travel, and with the help of the local US embassy, I was able to arrange transport home. I took my stuff out of storage, came here, bought this place, and here we are. Ryan looked at Bob as he finished his story. "Damn it. It sounds like something out of a movie," Bob said. Ryan grinned back. "Listen, it's late," Ryan said. "Why don't you stay the night?" "What about Sarah?" asked Bob. "I would like to think a little before making a decision. We'll discuss it in the morning," Ryan said. They walked into the house and Bob looked around at the empty walls and the sparsely furnished room. "It's like a cave in here," Bob said, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "I'm fine with it," Ryan said. "I don't need much. 4 walls and a roof to protect from the elements. You can sleep on the couch if you want. The bathroom is at the end of the corridor. Are you hungry?" "I could eat something," Bob said. "I don't have much food," Ryan said. "Mostly frozen dinners. I haven't cooked for a long time." "Okay," Bob said. "What do you have?" "Steak and gravy, macaroni and cheese, hot dogs," Ryan said. "I prefer to eat them raw. Choose." "Macaroni and cheese sounds good, please," Bob said. "Okay," Ryan said. "Give me a minute to heat this up in the microwave. You can turn on the TV, maybe there will be something interesting. Who knows?" Bob turned on the TV while Ryan put food in the microwave. After a while, he returned with 2 plates and handed one to Bob. "Don't you ever feel lonely here, all alone?" asked Bob. Ryan shook his head. "No," he said. "What about women?" asked Bob. "Have you dated anyone after the divorce?" "No," Ryan said. "Already been through this. I gave Lisa 20 years of my life, and what did I get in return? Never again. If things suddenly get hard for me, I'll go into town and rent a woman for an hour or two, if you know what I mean." Bob chuckled at this. "Trust me, son, at some point this will happen to you too." "Sarah will never do to me the way Lisa did to you," Bob said. "I thought the same thing once," Ryan said. And what came of it? It's in their genes, son. It's better to protect yourself now. You probably hate women, Bob said. No, Ryan said. Only one or two of them. I trust the rest only as much as I can push them away. What about your dream of having your own garage? Asked Bob. It burned down, just like my marriage, Ryan said. What are your dreams now? Asked Bob. Wake up, live through another day, Ryan said. Although I admit, sometimes I fantasize about being alone with Jake for at least 5 minutes. Would you kill him? Asked Bob. I don't know, Ryan said. That would be very tempting, but I prefer the idea that he will suffer pain for the rest of his miserable life, constantly looking over his shoulder. They finished their meal in silence. Finally, Ryan got up and gathered the dishes. He took them to the kitchen, rinsed them, and put them in the dishwasher. Do you have a place to stay for the night? He asked, returning to the room. Not yet, Bob said. Then you better stay here, Ryan said. He took a blanket and pillow from the hallway closet and handed them to Bob. The sofa is quite comfortable. There is only one bed in the house, and I sleep on it. Feel at home. I usually get up around 6 o'clock. Good night. Good night, Bob said, getting ready for bed. He noticed that Ryan was holding the letters he had given him earlier and wondered if he planned to read them. The next morning, Bob was awakened by the smell of coffee and something he couldn't identify. Ryan walked into the living room and handed him what looked like an egg burrito. Good morning, Ryan said. I hope you slept well. Eat for breakfast. There is little taste, but it will charge you with energy. Thanks, Bob said, yawning. He took a bite of the burrito and put the rest back on his plate. Ryan was right. There was almost no taste, and the microwave tortilla had already begun to harden like a brick. What are your plans for today? Ryan asked. I'm going to take the plane back this morning, Bob said. I would like you to come with me. I thought so, Ryan said. I'm packed and ready to leave at any time. Bob looked and saw a duffel bag by the door. What time is your flight? The flight leaves at 11 o'clock, Bob said. We better hurry if you're going to fly with me. If you don't mind, why did you decide to do this? Letters from Sarah, Ryan said. I read them last night. I think she realized that what she did was wrong. I could tell you that, Bob said. Perhaps, Ryan said. But it's more important when it comes from her. How does she get along with her mother? Not very good, Bob said. She's polite, but she doesn't approve of what her mother did and isn't shy about telling her about it. And she can't stand Jake. Ryan nodded. Well, it looks like there's still hope for her, Ryan said. Come on, it's time for us to go. Ryan closed the house, making sure everything was locked, and after Bob showered and got dressed, they left. When they got to the airport, Bob returned the rental car and paid for it. Then they went to the ticket counter. While Ryan was buying a ticket with cash, Bob made a phone call. They met again and stood in line for security. Do you always carry a lot of cash with you? Bob asked quietly so that no one would hear. I prefer to pay cash for everything, Ryan said. It helps me stay under the radar, if you know what I mean. I see, Bob replied. Well, just be careful. Don't worry, son, Ryan said. I'll cover you. He smiled and winked at the young man, who simply shook his head. By the way, Dr. Fritz, Sarah's doctor, wants to meet you as soon as we get to the hospital, Bob said. Have you talked to him before? Ryan asked. Yes, said Bob. I also called Sarah and told her I was coming back. And no, I didn't mention you. I thought you might want to surprise her. Well done, Ryan said. They finally settled into their seats and the plane took off. Ryan was already asleep when the plane reached its cruising altitude, his beat-up Stetson low on his face. A couple of hours later, the plane began to descend, waking Ryan from his slumber. Their flight ended shortly after, and they exited the plane. Ryan followed Bob into the parking lot, carrying his duffel bag over his shoulder. They walked to Bob's car, a fairly new RAV4, and put their luggage in the trunk. They got into the car and Bob drove to the hospital while Ryan looked around. When they got to the hospital, Bob let Ryan inside and took him to Dr. Fritz's office, where he introduced the two men. Ryan shook the doctor's hand and sat down at his invitation. "I understand you are Sarah Green's father," said Dr. Fritz. "Right," Ryan said. "Her mother told me you were dead," said the doctor. "Well, her source was wrong," Ryan said. "I see," said Dr. Fritz. "I understand that Mr. Green told you about your daughter's condition." "Yes, I did," Ryan said. "And if there is anything I can do to help, I will do it." "I'm glad to hear that," said Dr. Fritz. "What Sarah needs most now is a bone marrow transplant." "Will this cure her?" Ryan asked. "I think it's possible," said the doctor. "I don't want to give false hope, but without this, she won't survive." "What do I need to do?" Ryan asked. "We will need to take your blood and run a series of tests to make sure it is safe and compatible," the doctor said. "Do what you need to do, doctor," Ryan said. "When will it be known exactly?" "We'll take the samples now and take them to the laboratory," Dr. Fritz said. "We will know for sure by noon tomorrow." "Okay," Ryan said. "Let's do this." Dr. Fritz smiled at this. He walked to the door of his office and called a nurse. He gave her a few instructions and turned to Ryan. "Just follow Nurse Black," he said. "She will take you to a room and draw blood. By this time tomorrow, come to me for the results." "Can I see my daughter when we're done?" Ryan asked. "Of course," said Dr. Fritz. "I'm sure her husband already knows the way." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Caldwell. See you tomorrow." They shook hands again, and the doctor left to attend to another patient. Ryan followed the nurse into a small room and watched as she prepared the test bottles. He hated needles and turned away as she prepared for the procedure. "Okay, Mr. Caldwell," she said, wiping his arm with an alcohol swab. "Now there will be a light injection, that's all." Ryan closed his eyes and was surprised that it didn't hurt as much as he expected. "Done," she said with a smile. "It wasn't that bad, was it?" she asked, sticking a bright patch on his hand. "No, it's not like that," he said. "Great," she said. "We'll send this to the lab and get the results tomorrow." "See you then." After she left, he buttoned up his shirt sleeve and went out to Bob. "Are you ready to see Sarah?" asked Bob. Ryan nodded. "Yes," he said nervously. "Let's go." He followed Bob, wondering how anyone could work here without getting lost. The place was like a labyrinth, with corridors and passages in all directions. They got to the elevator and went up to the 6th floor. After exiting the elevator, they walked down several more corridors until they reached Sarah's room. Bob knocked on the door and looked inside. He motioned for Ryan to stay outside for a moment. Ryan heard his daughter's voice from the room. "Hello, honey," she said weakly. "I have a surprise for you," Bob said. "Oh, how great," she said. "You know that I love surprises." Bob motioned for Ryan to come in. He stepped into the room and saw his daughter for the first time in over 10 years. She was still very beautiful, although her skin was pale and blotchy in places. When she saw him, her eyes widened and her mouth fell open in surprise. "Dad," she asked, reminding him of what it was like when she was little. Tears began to form in the corner of his good eye as he looked at her. "Is it really you?" she asked. "It's me, Princess," he said, calling her by the nickname he used when she was little. As he approached her bedside, she raised her arms to hug him, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you died," she said, crying, hugging him tightly. "The rumors about my death were greatly exaggerated," he said, trying to joke. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Oh, is that what you mean?" Ryan asked, pointing to the eye patch. "Yes," she said. "Work injury," he said. "After you and your mother left, I traveled abroad a lot." "What were you doing?" she asked. "I was a private security consultant, so to speak," he said. "Sometimes things got, well, complicated." "Have you ever opened your garage?" she asked. Ryan shook his head. "No, never," he said. "After your mother left me the way she did, I lost all desire to open the garage." "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry," she said. "I feel terrible about the way it all happened." "I know," Ryan said. "I read your letters." So that's why they all came back? She asked. Yes, he said. I sold the house and got rid of everything after you left. There was no point in keeping him. Why have you never written to me? She asked. Well, when you left, I realized you didn't want to see or hear me, Ryan told her. Besides, I didn't have your address. Sorry about that, she said. I fell for all this nonsense from Jake, just like my mother. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I've already forgiven you, princess, Ryan said, causing her to sob uncontrollably as he hugged her. It's okay, honey, he whispered, holding her in his arms and stroking her hair. Dad is here. Everything will be fine. A few minutes later, she tiredly lay back in her bed. Did Bob tell you what's going on? She asked. Yes, I did, Ryan said. I've already talked to Dr. Fritz. They took the blood and tested it to make sure it was compatible. If so, I will donate bone marrow for you. When will you know for sure? She asked. Tomorrow, Ryan said. Thank you, she said. I can never thank you enough for this. No need, Ryan said. Just get better, okay? And take care of my grandson. She smiled weakly and nodded. I will, she said before turning to Bob. Thank you for finding my dad, she told him. He smiled and hugged her as she cried again. You're welcome, he said. I promised I would find it, didn't I? Yes, I promised, she said. They heard the door open and turned to see who had entered. Although more than 10 years had passed, Ryan recognized the woman standing in the doorway, Lisa. She was still in good shape and looked quite attractive, but he noticed that her features were harder than before. Ryan, she asked, it's you? I thought you. Dead? He asked, finishing her sentence. Yes, she said. Jake said so. Well, I'm very much alive, no thanks to you, Ryan said, making her wince. Your husband did his best, but he missed. What do you mean? She asked, shocked. Oh, come on, Lisa, Ryan said. You know he sent those people to take me out in the Middle East. Apparently, he decided to kill two birds with one stone, but he missed. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Bullshit, Ryan said. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked. Ryan looked at Sarah and Bob before answering. Of course, he said, standing up. He walked over to the nurse's station and asked if there was a private room somewhere they could use for a few minutes. Of course, the nurse said, pointing toward the small conference room. Just hang this on the door before you close it, she added, handing him a sign that read, occupied. Thank you, Ryan said, taking the sign. They entered the room and Lisa sat down while Ryan hung the sign on the door. He closed and locked the door before sitting down. Well, Ryan, Lisa began. What's happening? Why are you here? You are a smart woman, he said. Surely you can guess it yourself. Your brother-in-law found me and told me that Sarah needed a bone marrow transplant. She's still my daughter, despite everything you and Jake did to tear us apart, and I'm here to help her in any way I can. How much do you want? Asked Lisa. What? Ryan asked, shocked. You heard me, she said. How much do you want for your bone marrow? Isn't that what you're here for? Your garage is losing money, and you obviously need money, so you came here to see what you could get from me. First of all, bitch, Ryan said, emphasizing the word bitch, causing Lisa to recoil. I don't need your stinking dirty money. Secondly, our daughter is in the room right there, fighting for her life, so you can get off your damn high horse. So, you think after 10 years you can just walk in here and suddenly become father of the year? She asked sarcastically. Okay, I'm not perfect, Ryan said, but it wasn't me who cheated on you. It was the other way around. It wasn't me who suddenly filed for divorce. It wasn't me who made plans to destroy our family. It's you. You cheated on me, and for what? For the sake of money. What does this do to you? Last time I checked, this fit the definition of an available girl. So don't pretend to be a saint. So what do you need? She asked. In fact, I want my daughter to get better, he said. But there's probably more, she said in response. Since you mentioned it, there's something I'd like, Ryan said. What exactly? Asked Lisa. 5 minutes alone with your husband, he said. For what? She asked. So you could hit him? Is that what it's all about? You couldn't deal with him when I left for him, and now you want to meet him on the playground? I was actually thinking about that dark alley between 3rd and 4th Streets near Riverside, Ryan said. You can't be serious, she said. I'm serious, he told her. You think that my husband, a rich, powerful man worth billions, a man capable of getting people elected to office, would take the time to meet you in some alley? She asked. You're crazy. Okay, he said, standing up. You don't really seem to care about your daughter getting better. Maybe I should just go home. Wait, she said. You're really serious about this? I'm serious, he said. 5 minutes. No weapons, no security, no bodyguards. Just him and me, one-on-one. He owes me flesh, and I intend to get it, one way or another. He knows karate, Lisa said. He can take care of himself. Great, Ryan said. He will have to be able to stand up for himself. Tell me, is he using you as his personal punching bag? What's that supposed to mean? She asked. I can see the edge of the bruise on your collar, he said. I also noticed a bruise on your arm. How long has he been beating you? She lowered her sleeve and turned away for a moment. It was an accident, she said nervously. I was clumsy and tripped. Ryan chuckled. Bullshit, he said. I know he beats you. Hell, as far as I can tell, everyone knows. Bob knows, which means Sarah knows too. Why are you staying with him? Because of money? That's the thing, right? That's all you ever needed. Listen, Jake has a lot of stress on him right now, she said. Sometimes he does things, but he doesn't really mean anything bad. Ryan shook his head. I don't believe a word you say, he told her. Why don't you pick up the phone and call him right now? Are you really serious about this? She asked. Do you really want to meet him in a dark alley so you can hit him? I plan to do more than just hit him, but yeah, Ryan said. When do you want to do it? She asked. Right now, Ryan said. She looked at him, shocked. Who is this man? She thought. She took out her phone from her bag. Put it on speaker, Ryan said. She nodded, dialed the speed dial, and put it on speakerphone. What's happened? Jake asked when he answered the phone. Hi, honey, Lisa said. Sarah had someone visit her at the hospital, and he wants to see you right away. About? Jake asked. Who is this? This is, Ryan, she said. Ryan? Jake asked. Your ex? Is that the same Ryan? Yes, said Lisa. He is quite persistent. He wants to see you immediately. He says he only needs 5 minutes. Well, I'm not sure I can pull myself out right now, Jake said. I have a shareholders meeting today, and I have a lot to do. Listen, you little bastard, Ryan said. I have an account with you, and I want to meet you right now. Where? Jake asked. In the alley between 3rd and 4th Streets near Riverside, Ryan said. Do you know this area? Yeah, I know, Jake said. Okay, Ryan said. Be there. No security, no bodyguards, no weapons. Just you and me. Or are you too scared to meet a real man one-on-one? Maybe you prefer to hide behind your wife's skirts. Bastard, Jake growled. You said it right, Ryan said. Tell me, Jake, do your shareholders know how you destroyed my family? Do they know how you pulled off a deal in the Middle East 3 years ago? Do they know that you sent a command to kill your wife's ex-husband? Do they know about your extramarital affairs and the bastards you brought into the world? Do they know how you beat your wife? You fucking bastard, Jake growled. You don't dare bring this out in public. I will sue you for libel. You're wrong, Jake, Ryan said. I have a file on you, almost 3 inches thick, and I know several Wall Street Journal reporters who would love to get their hands on it. I think the guys from the SEC and DOJ will be interested in this too. So, are you going to meet me one-on-one, or should I make a call? Who are you, Jake? Man or a mouse? Okay, son of a bitch, Jake said. I'll meet you just like you said. Okay, Ryan said. And just so you know, if anything happens to me, my daughter or Lisa, This dossier will be sent to hundreds of media outlets and several federal agencies, not to mention your shareholders and board of directors, with photos and videos. Understood? Got it, Jake said, sighing. The call ended and Ryan looked at Lisa, who was looking at him in shock. Are you serious about all this? She asked. Absolutely, Ryan said. You didn't think that I'd been sitting with my hands folded all these years? I want to go with you, she said. I don't think that's a good idea, he told her. I don't care, she said. I also have the right to meet him. I take it you didn't know about all this? Ryan asked. She shook her head. No, I didn't, she said. At least, not about everything. Do you really have proof of all this? Of course, Ryan said. One call and it becomes common knowledge. It's definitely not going to be good for business. That bastard, she said quietly. Are you ready? Ryan asked. She nodded her head and stood up. Fine, let's go. I'll ask Bob to drive us. They left the room together and went to Sarah's room. Bob, I need you to take Lisa and me to an alley near Riverside, Ryan said. What? Asked Bob. Do you know this area? Ryan asked. Of course I know, but are you sure? Asked Bob. It's a pretty dangerous area. We won't be there long, Ryan said. What's happening? Asked Sarah. Just closing one question, Ryan said. Don't worry, we'll be back. I love you, Daddy, she cried. Ryan looked at her before answering. It had been years since anyone had told him that. I love you too, Princess, he said. Rest, we'll be back soon. They walked silently to Bob's car and got into it. Bob started the engine and looked at Ryan. What's happening? He asked. In fact, just a friendly meeting, Ryan said. Bob didn't believe him, but decided not to insist. He put the car in gear and drove off. They saw Jake's Jaguar parked at the curb and parked behind it. After stopping the car, Ryan looked around to see if Jake had posted guards or snipers. Seeing nothing, he got out of the car, as did Lisa and Bob. They entered the alley and saw Jake leaning against a dumpster, his expensive jacket slung over his shoulder. Stay here, Ryan told Bob. Keep an eye on the situation, and hold my hat. Bob took Ryan's beat-up Stetson and stayed behind, while Ryan and Lisa walked into the alley. Well, the cuckold is back from the grave, Jake said with disdain on his face. I thought you died 3 years ago in the Middle East. It seems like if you want something done well, you have to do it yourself. Seems like it, Ryan said. Lisa stood to the side and watched the interaction between the two men. You know I'm a third Dan black belt, Jake said. I won a bunch of tournaments. What, do you want a medal or something to pin it on? Said Ryan. Jake chuckled. A sense of humor, I see, he said. Fine. If you thought this was funny, then listen to this. Do you know what is the most pleasant thing about seducing a married woman? No, but I'm sure you'll tell me now, Ryan said. Yeah, Jake grinned. The best part is knowing she'll come home with it, and her unsuspecting hubby will have sex with her the same day or night. So Lisa was just a toy for you, Ryan asked. She was the best piece of ass I ever had, Jake said. I spent 6 months watching her slowly lose her love and respect for you. Then I talked to your daughter, made her agree to my little plan to ruin your life. So you just used them for your own satisfaction, Ryan said. Jake shrugged. Yes, he said. And you know why? Because I could, and I still do. Sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to reveal my cards like that. It was just sex. But I still love you. You're a fucking piece of shit, she said. It's not exactly a secret, Ryan said. I guess not, Jake said. So, are we going to put on your show, or are we going to talk here all day? Show me what you can do, Ryan said. Jake grinned and took a fighting stance. Ryan shook his head and chuckled. Jake kicked, but Ryan easily blocked it. Boy, using these Oriental martial arts against me will cost you dearly, Ryan said. Jake grinned and rushed at Ryan, but he was ready, since Jake had given away his intentions in advance. Ryan was like lightning, striking the throat, solar plexus, and finally the groin. As Jake crouched, Ryan grabbed him and ran towards one of the brick walls lining the alley. Ryan threw him to the ground. I can't breathe, Jake said breathlessly. Ryan ignored him and began to press his knee on the other man's throat. Ryan, please stop, Lisa screamed. You'll kill him. Ryan looked at her with his one good eye. Yes. Exciting, isn't it? He said, with a demonic glint in his eyes. He looked down and saw Jake's face begin to turn blue. He removed his knee from his throat and watched as Jake gasped for air. Ryan leaned over to Jake and whispered loud enough for Lisa to hear. Our time is up, Jake, old friend, he said. But remember one thing. If you ever lay a hand on Lisa or do anything to hurt my family, I swear to God I will find you like a dog. Do you understand me? Yes, Jake croaked. Yes, what? Ryan growled. Yes, sir, Jake said. Ryan nodded. By the way, Ryan added, parts of that dossier are sent to the feds anonymously. These are the parts that concern your illegal operations. But you promised, Jake croaked. So I lied a little, Ryan said. You know what I mean. I couldn't cover up illegal actions. That would make me an accessory after the crime. Good luck, did you understand that? And remember, I wasn't here. Ryan stood up and looked at Lisa. So this shit is the man you and Sarah left me for, he said, kicking Jake in the groin again. I hope it was worth it. By the way, you should probably call an ambulance. Looks like he slipped on something. Part of me wants to leave him here to die, she said. But that wouldn't be right, would it? Ryan shrugged. I will call, but it will be the last thing I do for him. Maybe I'll say he slipped on a banana peel. Ryan smiles. You can take his Jaguar to the hospital, Ryan said. I think he won't be able to drive for a while. Ryan turned and walked away, picking up his hat as he passed Bob. What now? Bob asked as they walked to his car. There's a Holiday Inn Express a few blocks down the road, Ryan said. Take me there, please. A little later, Ryan picked up his hat and was about to leave for dinner when there was a knock on the door. He was expecting a visit from the local police, but when he looked through the door peephole, he saw Lisa with a young man dressed in a white shirt, vest, and tie. He wondered what she wanted and opened the door. It's good that you're here, Lisa said. Can we come in for a while? Ryan looked around and saw no one else, noticing a cart between them. I was just about to get something to eat, but yeah, come in, he said, opening the door and stepping aside. You can put this on the table, Lisa said to the man with her. Yes, madam, he said, rolling the cart towards the table. As Ryan watched, the man took 2 covered dishes out of a box on the cart and placed them on the table. He placed the ice bucket on the table and opened a bottle of wine, pouring it into 2 glasses, which he placed next to the covered dishes. When he had finished setting the table, he removed the lids from the dishes. Guinea fowl, said Lisa. This is one of my favorite dishes, served with steamed carrots, onions, mushrooms, and rice pilaf, and a good Cabernet Sauvignon. She turned to the man with her. Thank you, Raoul, that's all. I'll return the dishes myself. As you wish, madam, the man said quietly. Enjoy your dinner, sir, he told Ryan. Thank you, Raoul, Ryan said. The young man turned and left the room, pushing the cart in front of him. Ryan looked at Lisa. You shouldn't have done that, he told her. I didn't, she said. This dinner was supposed to be for Jake tonight, but he's in the hospital, and I don't think he'll be able to eat at home anytime soon. The staff worked on this for hours, and I couldn't just throw it away. Plus, Bob told me you only eat frozen dinners and raw hot dogs, so I thought you'd like some real food for once. Was this dinner supposed to be for Jake? Ryan asked. Lisa nodded. Yes, she said. Well then, he said. In that case, let's get started. I'll happily eat his dinner. By the way, how's Jake? It's been better, she said, sitting down. Well, you'll excuse me if I don't wish him a speedy recovery, Ryan said, taking a bite of guinea fowl from his plate. This is delicious, by the way. My compliments to your boss. Lisa smiled. Thank you, she said, taking a bite of her food. She looked at him carefully for a moment before speaking. "What happened to you, Ryan?" she asked. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You have changed," she said. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when those you love more than life betray you without a single warning," he said, taking a sip of wine. "I'm really sorry," she said. "So what did you do after we broke up? I know that Sarah tried to contact you, but she never succeeded. What happened?" "I sold the house and got a small apartment," Ryan said. "Spent a few months drowning my grief in beer, mostly feeling sorry for myself. When I saw the article about your wedding to Jake, I went to the bar to get drunk. Met an old army friend, and he recruited me for a job. Spent the next 9 years working as a security consultant." "By whom?" asked Lisa. "A mercenary," he said. "A soldier of fortune. By the way, I made pretty good money from this, and it gave me the opportunity to vent some of the anger I felt toward you three." "You must have hated us," she said. "You have no idea," he said. "Every time I pulled the trigger, I saw you, or Sarah, or Jake." "Oh God," she said. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it would hurt you so much. I thought you would just find another woman and move on with your life." Ryan shook his head. "No," he said. "Don't get me wrong. I met a lot of women, even slept with a bunch of them, but I'm done with the relationship. Having been burned once, I am now careful." "What about now?" she asked. "Is there anyone in your life right now? Girlfriend or something like that?" Ryan shook his head. "No," he said. "I tried it once, but it didn't work. Like I told Bob, if I get really sick, I'll go into town and hire someone for a couple of hours." "You must be very lonely," she said. "I'm alone, but I'm not alone," he said. "Do you still hate us?" asked Lisa. "No," he said. "Not that much, anyway. I forgave Sarah, if you want to know." "And me?" she asked. "Well, after today, I feel like I can be in the same room with you without feeling the urge to strangle your pretty little neck," he said. "Thanks for that, I guess," she said. "You forgave Sarah, why not me?" "I read her letters," he said. "Bob brought them to me. I realized after reading them that she was manipulated. After all, she was young, inexperienced, and impressionable. You and Jake took advantage of this. He lured her with promises of expensive cars, expensive education, and trips to luxurious places, and I could not compete with that. She matured and realized that she had done wrong. She tried to tell me then, but I never received her letters. I'm sure if I knew how to use email, she would have contacted me anyway. Hell, I didn't even know how to use a computer, let alone email. I didn't even know how to use a cell phone. By the way, I still don't have it." He took a sip of wine before continuing. "You, on the other hand, didn't have that excuse," Ryan said. "It wasn't like you were drugged with something, used or blackmailed. He seduced you and you went for it. Then you helped him turn Sarah against me. It's not something I can just forgive or forget. You destroyed me. On purpose. Believe me, it would be better if you just shot me in the head." "I never thought about it like that," she said. "I'm really sorry. Anyway, my last job was working for an oil sheikh in the Middle East," Ryan said. "He was pressured to sell the business, and he was attacked. I was hired to help train his security forces. Guess who tried to remove him?" "Jake?" she asked. "Exactly," Ryan said. "You won't believe who is hiring mercenaries now. It turns out that Jake hired a gang to seize the sheikh's oil fields, something like carrots and sticks. If negotiation doesn't work, use force. It turns out that Jake found out that I was working for the sheikh and planted assassins to eliminate me. I think he decided to kill two birds with one stone." "So you lost your eye?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "Yes," he said. "They were close, but missed. The sheikh knew, but never let Jake or his representatives know that I was still alive." "How do you know all this?" asked Lisa. "He gave me a dossier with some very interesting information," Ryan said. "He also gave me fatherly advice, something like getting rid of the hatred before it kills me. He was right, of course. He paid my medical bills, gave me a very large bonus, and suggested I find a quiet and peaceful place. So I bought a place in West Texas and started my own little business. Case? Asked Lisa. Yes, he said. I have spent the last 3 years and nearly $3 million keeping Jake under constant surveillance. Even recruited several spies into night petroleum. You'd be surprised at what I found. This is the dossier you were talking about earlier, right? She asked. Yes, this is it. Tell me something, Ryan said. Everything Jake said in the alley. This is true. Did you really do all this? Did you really do all this to me? Her face turned red, and she looked down for a moment before answering. Yes, unfortunately, it's true, she said quietly. I can't express how ashamed I am for what I did to you. You didn't deserve this. Imagine it happened the other way around, Ryan said. What if I cheated on you? How would you react? I would be furious, of course, she said. I know it sounds hypocritical. Because that's what hypocrisy is, he said. Now, what if I told you that I have irrefutable proof that Jake actually cheated on you? That, in fact, he has been cheating on you for at least 3 years? How would you feel about this? You were there, in the alley. You heard what he said. I'd like to see that evidence, she said. Ryan took a notebook out of his bag and handed it to her. Here you go, he said. Written reports, DVDs of photographs and videos, even certified copies of his children's birth certificates and DNA test results proving he is their biological father. I was told that this evidence is more than enough for the judge to grant you a divorce on the grounds of adultery. She flipped through the pages of her notebook, amazed at what she was reading. Finally, she closed the notebook and wiped a tear from her eye. It hurts like hell, doesn't it? He asked. Yes, she said quietly. I suspected it for a while, but I had no proof. That must have made you happy, didn't it? I have to admit, when I first heard about it, I was a little excited, Ryan said. A cheater being cheated on by the person she cheated with in the first place. This is poetic justice. Then I remembered how I felt the first time. At least I told you, she said. 6 months later, Ryan replied, By the way, how did this happen? How did he manage to turn you two against me? Do you want the story in detail? She asked. No, a short summary will do, he said. It all started after I was hired as his personal assistant, she said. At first he was professional, friendly, and polite. Then he began to show charm. You know, I accompanied him on business trips around the world. We stayed in the best hotels and ate in the best restaurants. I've met a lot of what you would call scum celebrities, members of Congress, business tycoons, heads of state. I even met the president once. Jake started making little statements here and there, telling me that this could be my life if I wanted to. He constantly humiliated you, saying that you were just an empty fat monkey who would never achieve anything and would never be able to give Sarah and me the life we deserve. After a while, I began to see you for what he was. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I lost all respect for you. On the one hand, I knew you worked hard for Sarah, and I did, and I knew you. I had your dream. But on the other hand, I knew Jake was right. I think sex just happened. She looked at the floor, her face red with shame. I'm so sorry, Ryan, she said. Now I realize I was just a selfish bitch. Right now, all I can do is hope that one day you can forgive me. I am not your spiritual father, he said. When did this pressure on you start? About 4 or 5 years ago, she said. I accused him of having an affair. I didn't have any evidence, just a rumor I heard in the office. We had a big fight, and he hit me hard. I told him that if he ever hit me again, I would divorce him. This did not happen again for some time. He didn't beat me, but he beat me up pretty bad. Now this happens about once every couple of weeks. Why didn't you call the police? Ryan asked. You could throw him in jail. I was afraid, she said. I saw what he did to people, and I didn't want to die. Dead? He asked. She nodded her head. He was the one who told me you were dead, she said. The way he said it scared me. He never gave any details, but somehow I knew he was involved. Got it, Ryan said. By the way, there's something else I think you should see. He pulled an envelope from his duffel bag and showed her the letter inside. It was a letter that Sarah had sent him several years ago. He pointed to the paragraph he had highlighted. "I hate this here," Sarah wrote. "I hate Jake and I hate Mom. He's creepy, Dad. You have no idea. He stares at me all the time and makes rude remarks about my body. I swear, if he touches me, I will kill him. You. I wish you were here so I could kick his ass. I tried to tell my mom, but she never listens." Lisa returned the letter, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "Oh God," she said, "my own daughter hates me." "I don't think she feels that way anymore," Ryan said. "Judging by the postmark, it was written about a week after she turned 18. However, it gives some insight into your family life at that time. Have you ever noticed anything in between?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't really remember," she said. "But she was right. I was very busy with his money. I remember her saying something to me about it at the time, but I just chalked it up to teenage rebellion and brushed it off. I guess I should have listened to her." "Basically, you looked and thought the grass was greener on the other side of the fence, and then you found out it was full of chiggers and ticks and snakes," Ryan said. "Yes, almost," said Lisa. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm not expecting another divorce, but I can't go on like this," she said. "Well, whatever you do, you better do it quickly," Ryan told her. "As soon as the feds get what I sent them, all this bullshit will fall." "What things are we talking about?" she asked. "Mostly these are financial issues. It's beyond my understanding. There are also bribes to foreign officials and some other things like attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. By the way, against me. My lawyer tells me Jake could end up in jail for a long time, and Knight Petroleum could end up in the scrap heap along with Enron. Once they get going, they can easily freeze all your assets," Ryan said. "So if I were you, I'd strike while the iron is hot. Get everything you can before the feds close in." "You're probably right," she said. "I'll call my lawyer in the morning." "I think it would be smart," Ryan said. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "That is, help me, after what I did to you." "It's easy," Ryan said. "Sarah will need all the help and support she can get, and she has a young man who needs his grandmother. Do you think maybe when this is all over we can, Lisa began before Ryan interrupted her. "What? Together again? Should we pick up where we left off as if nothing happened?" he asked. He shook his head. "I don't think that will happen. I've already been there once. Like I said, I'm damaged goods. You said it yourself. I have changed. Very much. I'm not the same person you knew 12 years ago. You are Cornish hens, champagne and caviar, and I am TV dinners, sweet tea, and raw hot dogs." "I understand," she said quietly. "Think, maybe we could at least become friends? Maybe even with benefits?" "I've learned to never say never," he said. "I don't know. Maybe one day. Who knows what tomorrow might bring?" "Can I at least come visit you in Texas?" she asked. "Well, I don't live in a mansion like you, and I sure as hell don't have servants to wait on me hand and foot. But I think you can, if you don't mind sleeping on the couch or the floor," he said. "Sofa or floor?" she asked. "Yes," Ryan said. "I only have one small double bed, and I sleep there. If Bob is there, he gets the couch. Only the floor remains. But it's a pretty spacious place, so there's a lot of flooring." She grinned. "I remember a time when we could make good use of a double bed, or a sofa, or the floor. But at least it's a start," she said. "Speaking of tomorrow, when are you going back to the hospital?" "I have an appointment with Dr. Fritz just before noon," he said. "Bob will pick me up around 10 o'clock. "Okay," she said. "See you at the hospital." "Okay," he said. "And thanks for the food. It was the best thing I've eaten in years." She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. "Why don't you let me help you carry this to your car?" "That would be nice," she said. "Thank you." They collected the used dishes, made sure the wine was sealed, and took everything to her car. After he was loaded and secured, Lisa looked at Ryan one last time. "I'm really sorry I ruined everything," she said. I hope that one day you can put aside your hatred for me and learn to forgive me. One day at a time, Ryan said. This meal was a good start. Thanks again. Any time, she said, hugging him. She was surprised that he hugged her back like he always did. She got into the car and a tear rolled down her cheek. How could I be so stupid and selfish, she thought to herself. He waved goodbye to her and watched her drive away, then lit a cigarette and returned to his room. The next morning, Bob arrived promptly at 10 o'clock and they headed to the hospital. Heard you had dinner with Lisa last night, Bob said. Yes, Ryan replied. She brought a guinea fowl. Good food, huh? Asked Bob. Say what you want about Jake, but his chefs sure know how to cook. Did you and Lisa have a chance to talk? Yeah, we talked, Ryan said. I think we got off to a good start. For Sarah and little Ryan, he added, and Bob smiled. Of course, said Bob. They got to the hospital and went to meet Dr. Fritz. Mr. Caldwell, the doctor said as they entered, please come into my office. They entered his small office and the doctor closed the door. Well, what do you say, doctor? Ryan asked. Good news, Mr. Caldwell, said Dr. Fritz. You're perfect. Great, Ryan said. When do we start? I booked the operating room for 13 o'clock today, the doctor said. We will put you and Sarah under anesthesia at the same time and then begin the operation. The doctor continued to explain the procedure, which Ryan found quite painful. Don't worry, said Dr. Fritz. You will be under anesthesia the entire time. We will leave you overnight to control the pain. It will hurt quite a bit for a while, but it will pass. How soon will we know if it worked? Ryan asked. We'll find out pretty quickly after the operation, the doctor said. Okay, Ryan said. Can we go up to Sarah? Of course, said Dr. Fritz. But we'll need to get you into the hospital pretty soon, so don't be late. Got it, Ryan said. He stood up, shook the doctor's hand, and they left. They went to Sarah's room and told her the news. Oh, thank God, she said. They told me that we could be prepared for surgery very soon. Have you talked to Mom? Ryan asked. Yeah, she stopped by earlier and said she was going to see her lawyer, Sarah said. Is she going to get a divorce? I think so, Ryan said. Finally, she said. Bob told me what you did to Jake, she added. From what I heard, you were too soft on him. Your mother said he might be paralyzed from the waist down, Ryan said. He got off easy anyway, she said bitterly. I think the real fun is just beginning, Ryan told her. Do you mean there will be something else? She asked. Ryan smiled and winked at her, making her smile back. Wonderful, I can't wait. After they had talked for a while, Dr. Fritz came in with several nurses. It's good that you're all here, said the doctor. It's time to get you ready. Mr. Caldwell, please go with Nurse Jacobs. She will check you in and take you to your room. Okay, Ryan said. He leaned towards his daughter and hugged her, kissing her on the cheek. It's time, he said with a smile. She smiled back. Everything will be fine, he said. He followed the nurse to a table near the nurse's station. Having filled out what seemed like a whole stack of papers, he was shown into a room, handed a hospital gown, and told to undress. Since we will need access to the pelvic area, you will need to completely undress, the nurse said with a somewhat sinister smile. When he was ready, they inserted an Roman 4 into his arm and checked his vitals. Soon he was taken out of the room into a rather cool operating room. He had already been given a sedative, and he could feel its effects. Dr. Fritz looked at him, and Ryan realized that the doctor was smiling. Are you ready? Asked the doctor. Let's do this, Ryan said. They put something on his face, and he fell asleep. The next thing he remembered was waking up in his room. It took him a while to come to his senses, but when he did, he felt pain in his hips. The doctor warned that this would happen. A few minutes after waking up, Dr. Fritz entered the room and examined him. How do we feel? He asked. Ryan laughed quietly to himself. Why do they always use we? He asked himself. My thighs hurt like hell, Ryan croaked. That's normal, said Dr. Fritz. We'll give you something for the pain. Usually, in such cases, we send patients home, but since you came from out of town, I will leave you here overnight to monitor your recovery. How is Sarah? Ryan asked. I think she'll be fine, the doctor said. It's too early to tell, but she's responding better than we expected. Ryan nodded. When can I see her? He asked. Not until tomorrow, said Dr. Fritz. I want you both to recover a little first. Rest now, Mr. Caldwell. I'll check on you later. A nurse came into the room, checked his vitals, and gave him a pill for pain. Rest, Mr. Caldwell, she said. If you get hungry, just call the kitchen and tell them what you want, okay? Thank you, he said, falling asleep. A couple of hours later, he woke up and looked at the menu. He called the kitchen, placed his order, and an employee brought out his food meatloaf, mashed potatoes and gravy, and green beans. It was a little better than the frozen dinners he was used to, but not by much. However, it satisfied my hunger. He had just finished when he heard a knock on the door. Come in, he shouted. Bob and Lisa entered the room. They took seats on either side of him. How do you feel? Asked Lisa. Whines, he said, but otherwise it's fine. The doctor says I will be discharged tomorrow. Okay, said Bob. How is Sarah? Ryan asked. Bob nodded. She feels better than expected, he said. The doctors are very optimistic. That's good news, Ryan said. He looked at Lisa before speaking again. How are you doing? Tense, she said. I met with my lawyer this morning and started the divorce process. I also started the process of dividing the property. This is a community property state, so theoretically I am entitled to half of all our property. The only catch is the prenuptial agreement he made me sign, but my lawyer thinks he can get around it. Then you should be fine, Ryan said. Theoretically, said Lisa. Let's see. This will not be an easy divorce, certainly not like ours. I doubt it, Ryan told her. I'm also getting a restraining order to keep him away from me, the house, and Sarah, she said. I think there will be no problems with this. Have you seen Jake yet? He asked. Not yet, she said. I'm not going to see him until he's given the documents. He is still in the hospital and will likely remain there for some time. I don't know what will happen next. Okay, I have to go. I still have a lot to do. I'll come by tomorrow, okay? Of course, Ryan said. How long will you stay here? She asked. I don't know, he said. Maybe another day or two. I want to make sure Sarah is okay before I go home. Okay, she said. Then I'll see you later. See you, he said. To his surprise, she leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. Sweet dreams, she said with a smile. Before he could react, she was already out the door. He looked at Bob and saw a questioning look on his face. What? Ryan asked. She must have cooked you a special dinner yesterday, Bob said. Ryan smiles. Yes, that's true, he said. But that's all it was. Whatever you say, said Bob. If you don't mind, I'll go check on Sarah and then leave. See you tomorrow. Okay, Ryan said. See you tomorrow. The next day, he found that his hip didn't hurt as much as before, but it still hurt, and it was difficult to walk without support. The nurse brought him a cane, and he realized that it made walking much easier. The doctor examined him that same day and discharged him with a prescription for painkillers. The nurse brought the wheelchair and wheeled him into Sarah's room, where Bob was waiting. Dad, Sarah exclaimed when she saw him. How do you feel? Better, he said. How are you? You look better. At least you got a blush. It's still pretty painful, she said, but the doctor says I'm recovering better than they expected. I'm glad to hear that, Princess, he said. They continued their conversation until Ryan noticed that Sarah looked a little tired. He looked at Bob. Will you drop me off at the hotel? He asked. Of course, said Bob. They said their goodbyes, and the nurse drove Ryan to the patient drop-off area where Bob had parked his car. Can you manage to get to your room? Asked Bob. I can handle it, Ryan said. They gave me pills and a cane, so everything will be fine. Okay, Bob said. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Yes, Ryan said. It will do. See you tomorrow. Ryan got out of the RAV4 and headed to his room, leaning on his cane. That night, while lying on his bed in his pajamas and watching TV, he heard a knock on the door. "Just a minute," he said, picking up the cane. He limped to the door and looked through the peephole. Seeing Lisa and noticing that she was alone, he opened the door. He was still expecting a visit from the local authorities, so he looked around as she walked inside with what looked like a large picnic basket. "I hope you don't mind my visit," she said. "Have you already had dinner?" "No, not yet," he said. "I was just sitting here and watching TV." "Why don't you sit down and I'll make you dinner?" she said. "Do you still like lasagna?" "I love it," he said. "Great," she said, placing the basket on the bed. Opening it, she took out a portable tray and placed it on the bed in front of Ryan. She then pulled out a covered plate and cutlery, placing them on the tray in front of him. Then she took out a can of green tea. "Do you have ice?" she asked. "Yes," he said, pointing to the bucket on the dresser. She put ice in a plastic glass and poured tea into it. "Thank you," he said as she placed the glass on the nightstand next to him. "Aren't you going to eat?" "I've already eaten," she said. "And what suddenly causes this?" he asked. "I remember how much you liked my lasagna, and I thought you would enjoy it," she said. "Well, I'm really pleased," he said. "Thank you, and it's just as delicious as I remember." "Better than those frozen dinners?" she asked with a smile. "Absolutely," Ryan said. "You know these things are filled with all sorts of nasty things," she said. "Yes, and sometimes I think the cardboard would taste better than what's inside," he said. "So why do you eat them?" she asked. "You don't cook anymore. You always cooked before." "Well, then I had someone to cook for," Ryan said. "I think it's just laziness. I don't see the point in wasting a lot of time when you're only cooking for yourself." "Have you ever started your own car service?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "That dream died when you and Sarah left. I'm too old and worn out to start a business." "Nonsense," she said. "You're 50 years old, aren't you? It's not too old. When you've been through what I've been through in the last 10 years, that's old age," he said with a thoughtful look. "Trust me." "But what do you live on?" she asked. "I can handle it," he said. "I have enough money to live the rest of my life." "What do you do all day?" she asked. "Mostly I just sit and drink tea," he said. "I watch the weeds grow. I look at the clouds. Sometimes I do a little target shooting." "This is not life," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe the house needs painting," he said. "Maybe I'll do that when I get back." "It's better than doing nothing," she said. "Sometimes doing nothing suits me just fine," he said. "Can I sit with you and watch TV?" she asked. "Of course," he said, carefully moving away to give her space on the bed. She sat next to him, and they watched a movie. "I remember we used to do this often," she said. He nodded. He remembered this too. "I loved it when you sat down and rocked Sarah to sleep. She looked so innocent, with her little arms wrapped around your neck. You carried her to her crib, tucked her in, and kissed her goodnight. I miss this." "Yes, me too," he said. She snuggled up to him and laid her head on his shoulder. "Hug me, please?" she asked. He hugged her, pressing her to him. It had been many years since he had done this. She seemed as warm as before when they were married. She suddenly burst into tears, sobbing on his shoulder. He held her close and let her cry. "Sorry," she said, wiping tears from her face. "I miss this with you so much. I don't remember Jake doing anything like that. I really ruined everything for everyone, didn't I?" "I won't argue," he said. She cried a little more as he silently held her. They watched another program, Lisa resting her head on Ryan's shoulder. After the program ended, she sat down and looked at him. "It's time for me to go before it's too late," she said. "I really enjoyed spending this time with you." "Me too," he said. "And thanks for dinner again. It was delicious." "Please," she said, "can you do something for me?" "What exactly?" he asked, afraid of what she might ask. "You said the other day that little Ryan needs his grandma," she said. "He also needs his grandfather. Do you promise to be there for him? And for Sarah?" Of course, he said, which brought a smile to her face. Thank you, she said. When are you leaving home? Tomorrow afternoon, he said. Bob will pick me up in the morning, and I will say goodbye to Sarah and then return home. Okay, she said. Don't disappear, okay? I won't, he said. She kissed him on the cheek, gathered her things, and left. The next day he found that the pain had subsided, but he still needed a cane to get around. After breakfast, Bob came in and helped him with his things. He checked out of the hotel, and they headed to the hospital. When they entered Sarah's room, he saw a little boy next to her bed. He knew from the photo he had seen earlier that it was her son, Ryan. The boy looked up as they entered. Ryan, Sarah said, this is your grandfather. His name is also Ryan. Why don't you come over and say hello? Hello, sir, said the little boy. Are you really my grandfather? Ryan sat down and smiled, looking at the baby. Yes, I'm your grandfather, he said. What happened to your eye? The boy asked, pointing to Ryan's eye patch. Well, I lost it, Ryan said. Do you want me to help you find him? Asked the boy. I'm very good at finding things. Ryan laughed. I'm sure you're doing a good job, Ryan said. But no, this is not necessary. He hugged the boy and turned to Sarah. How do you feel? He asked her. You look better than yesterday. Still sore and weak, but getting better, she said. They will leave me here for a few days to monitor my condition. That's probably reasonable, Ryan said. They talked for some time until Lisa arrived. After everyone had talked, Bob looked at his watch. I guess it's time to take you to the airport, he said. Ryan looked at his watch. You're right, he said. He stood up, hugged his daughter, and kissed her on the cheek. Get well soon, princess, okay? He said. I'll get better, Dad, she said. Thank you for everything. I love you. I love you too, princess, Ryan said. Bob, said Lisa, if you don't mind, I'll take Ryan to the airport. I have a couple of things I need to talk to him about. Do you mind? Not at all, he said. I'll go down and get his luggage. Promise me that you will come visit someday, Ryan said to Sarah. I promise, Dad, she said. He nodded and left the room, Lisa walking next to him. So, what did you want to talk about? Ryan asked as they got into Lisa's BMW. Elmer Jenkins, the chairman of the board of directors, came to see me, she said. Looks like the feds got your file and someone gave him a warning. The council will meet this evening to discuss the situation. Elmer says the board is leaning toward placing Jake on long-term leave, at least until the lawsuit is resolved. You couldn't find a better guy, Ryan said. They also think that I will be appointed interim CEO during the investigation and trial, if there is one, she said. Congratulations, he said. It may be premature, she said. But thanks anyway. After Jake and I got married, he made me vice president and put me in charge of what he called administrative operations. Essentially, I was in charge of paperwork. Elmer seems to think that I can quickly learn what Jake was doing and thinks that the company now needs someone from the Knight family at the helm. I wish you good luck, he said. And why are you telling me this? Because I know how the council works, she said. They'll want to know where you got this information. And they think that you can turn on your feminine charm and find this from me. Maybe treat me to homemade lasagna, he grinned. Perhaps, she said. Well, that won't happen, he said. I promised anonymity, and I kept my word. Besides, it is no longer in my hands. I understand, she said. Absolutely. I won't insist, I promise. They stopped in front of the terminal, and Lisa turned off the car. She took a box out of her bag and handed it to him. What is this? Ryan asked. Just a little gift, she said. I know you don't have a phone, so I bought it for you. This is the latest model with all the features. You can send messages, emails, take photos, videos, whatever you want. I've already set it up with your area code and programmed my numbers and Bob's and Sarah's. Thank you, he said. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said. But you promised to keep in touch, and I think this is the best way. Are there instructions here? He asked. Of course, she said. Great, he said. This will give me something to read on the way home. She walked with him to the check-in counter and waited for him to get his boarding pass. She stayed with him until he reached the checkpoint. "Looks like it's time for us to say goodbye," he said. "Don't say goodbye," she said. "Just goodbye, at least for a while. Let me know when you get home, okay?" "Okay," he said. She kissed him on the cheek. "It was nice to see you again, Ryan," she said. "I really regret everything." He nodded. "I know. It was nice to see you again, too," he said. "Give the children my love, okay?" She smiled. "Definitely," she said, leaving. He watched her leave before standing in line for security. A few hours later, he stood in front of his house after being dropped off by a taxi. A sad house, he thought, looking at the old building. He noticed that the paint was peeling, revealing boards that had turned gray from exposure to the weather. The whole house looked sad. In his mind's eye, he imagined a cartoon house with a sad face, a tear falling from one drooping eye. This reflected how he had been feeling for quite some time. He felt sorry for letting the house run so badly. This house was good for him. It sheltered him from bad weather, warmed him in winter, and provided relative coolness in summer. But something has changed in him over the past few days. He no longer felt the all-consuming anger and hatred that had accompanied him all these years. Perhaps, he thought, it was time for the house to reflect this change. "Looks like it's time we both got our act together, old friend," he said to no one in particular. In his imagination, the face of the house smiled and the tears disappeared. He took out his phone and was surprised that it had a good signal. It took him a while, but he sent messages to Lisa, Sarah, and Bob saying he had arrived home safely. "Thanks for letting me know," Bob replied. Sarah sent the same message, adding, "Love you," with a smiling face emoji. Lisa also thanked him for the message. He took his cane and bag and went inside. The next day, he began going around the house, writing down everything that needed to be done. He finally realized he couldn't do it all on his own, so he started calling contractors. Over the next few days, several contractors came to inspect the house and give their estimates. The contractor he chose was not the cheapest, but not the most expensive either. However, he said he could do whatever Ryan wanted, even if he had to hire subcontractors. Ryan knew it would cost him a pretty penny, but he didn't care. He just wanted the job done well. Ryan originally wanted the house painted, but the contractor suggested replacing the old boards with siding. That way, he said, the frame could also be inspected and anything needed replaced. This seemed reasonable to Ryan, so he gave the contractor the green light and check to begin work. A couple of months later, Ryan was sitting in his living room, eating microwaved meatloaf and watching TV, when a piece of news caught his attention. "This is an urgent message," said the presenter. "The Department of Justice today announced federal charges against Jacob Knight, former CEO of Knight Petroleum. Knight is charged with multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was relieved of his duties by the board 2 months ago after he was allegedly attacked in a Central City alley. His wife, Lisa Knight, was named interim CEO in his absence. Knight, who is now wheelchair-bound, was taken into federal custody and is being held without bail." A few minutes after the message, his phone rang. He noticed that it was Lisa's number and answered the call. "Have you seen the news?" she asked. "I just saw it," he said. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think he's still as dangerous as ever," Ryan said. "Maybe even more. Be careful." "I will," she said. "How are you?" "Everything is fine," he said. "Just finishing work on the house." "I can't wait to see what you did with the house," she said. "I saw the photo you sent." He looked rather sad. "Yes, it was so," he said. "So what else did you want?" "Now that he's been charged, you can hear from the feds," she said. "They are interested in the attempt on your life. I just wanted to warn you." "Thank you for this. I was waiting for this," he said. They ended their conversation and Ryan finished his dinner. The next day, he received a call from Mike Gregory, his lawyer in town, asking him to come over. "I have 2 federal agents here," he said. "They want to talk to you about the attempt on your life." Only with immunity, Ryan said. It's already settled, Mike said. Can you come? Yes, I'll be right there, Ryan said. He informed the foreman who was in charge of the repairs that he would be gone for some time and went to the city. When he arrived at Mike's office, he was introduced to two men in dark suits, Special Agent Daryl Smith and Agent Jim Jones, both of the FBI based in El Paso. How can I help? Ryan asked. We're closing a case against Jacob Knight, and we need information about your work in the Middle East, Smith said. Ryan looked at Mike before saying something. First, I'd like some assurance, Ryan said. We have already agreed to give you complete immunity, Smith said. We just want to understand why Jacob Knight decided to make an attempt on your life. Ryan looked at Mike for confirmation. It's okay, Ryan, Mike said. You have complete immunity in exchange for any information you can provide. Ryan nodded and sat down. Okay, he said. Did you know that Jake Knight stole my wife 12 years ago and conspired to destroy my family? No, we didn't know that, Jones said. Yes, it was, Ryan said. After he took my wife and daughter from me, I did private work for about 9 years. My last job was in the Middle East, where I helped an oil company sheikh improve his security. I was later told that he was under pressure to sell the company to Knight Petroleum. While I was there, we were attacked by armed people. At first, I thought they might have been Al-Qaeda or ISIS terrorists, but I later found out they were working for Knight. Somehow Knight found out that I was working for the sheikh and brought in a team of assassins to kill me. How did you find out about this? Asked Smith. The sheikh told me about this after the attack, Ryan said. He gave me a dossier, which became part of the materials that I submitted to the Ministry of Justice. Do you know how Sheikh Abdullah received this information? Asked Smith. No, I don't know, Ryan said, and I didn't consider it necessary to ask. I collected this along with everything else I received later and passed it on to you. So you were the source of the dossier? Jones asked. Yes, Ryan said. After that attack, I came back here and bought a house, but I paid for Knight to be under surveillance. It took me 3 years, but after I had gathered what I thought was enough information to arrest and convict him, Mike turned over the entire package to your office. As you know, the dossier includes transfers of funds abroad for people with the aim of eliminating me. Do you think that he deliberately did this because of your ex-wife and daughter? Jones asked. Ryan nodded. Yes, Ryan said. But why? Asked Smith. He has already married your ex-wife. Why doesn't he just leave you alone? Because he's a vindictive son of a bitch, Ryan said. Because he's a bastard. I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. Perhaps he thought he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Did you know that Jake Knight was allegedly attacked the day before we received your file? Asked Smith. I heard something happened to him, Ryan said. Do you know anything about this? Jones asked. Just what I heard on the news today, Ryan said. I see, Jones said. This is all, Ryan asked. For now, Mr. Caldwell, Smith said. If we need anything else, we will contact you. They said goodbye and left. Ryan turned to Mike. Do you know what happened to Jake? Mike asked. I know he got what he deserved, Ryan said. Call it fatherly justice and leave it at that, okay? Okay, Mike said. Ryan said goodbye to Mike and drove home. He heard no more from the federal agents and kept in touch with Lisa, Sarah, and Bob as the legal matter worked its way through the court system. Jake's lawyers worked diligently to slow the process to a near standstill. Finally, about 6 months after he contacted the contractor, the home renovation was completed and, as expected, it cost a little more than the contractor originally said. But according to Ryan, it was worth it. The old exterior boards were replaced with siding, additional insulation was added, and some of the framing had to be replaced. In addition, the interior walls were repaired and painted, and new carpet was installed throughout the home. He updated much of the plumbing and upgraded the electrical system. The 50-year-old chiller was replaced with a modern central air conditioning and heating system. The bathrooms and kitchen have been renovated and new appliances installed. He even built flower boxes for the windows facing the street and planted flowers in them. The old garage was demolished, and a new one was built in its place, with a door leading to the kitchen. Feeling inspired, he built a white fence around the front yard and replaced the gate. The front and backyards were completely landscaped. New soil was brought in and seeds were planted. Trees were brought in and planted to shade the house and yard. The yard was now lush and green, and Ryan realized he would need to buy a lawn tractor to maintain it. He even installed a pool in the yard, thinking little Ryan might like it if he ever came to visit. He also bought new furniture for the house, replacing his old single bed with a king-size bed, and furnished the other 3 bedrooms in case Sarah, Bob, and Lisa came to visit. "You have a really nice house here, Mr. Caldwell," said the contractor, admiring his work. "The foundation is in good condition, and most of the frame is also in good condition. If you ever decide to sell it, you can get great money for it." "Thank you," Ryan said, "but I think I'll keep it." After the contractor left, he looked at the house and took a photograph. In his imagination, the house seemed to smile at him, and he smiled back. He walked inside and admired his newly renovated home. Smiling, he was preparing to send the photo to Sarah, Bob, and Lisa when his phone rang. The number was Sarah's, so he answered the call. "Dad," she cried, "you need to get back quickly. Please hurry up." "What happened, Princess?" he asked. "Are you sick again?" "No," she cried. "This is Mom. She was wounded. Doctors don't know if she will survive." "I'll be there as soon as possible," he said, ending the call.